Hello, class, and welcome to our review of the excerpt from a study in Scarlet. Um, it comes from, and I'll put the link to this PDF document online if you want to read more from the work. Literally, it comes from the chapter 2 entitled The Science of Deduction. So we have another example of deduction in this Sherlock Holmes story, this excerpt from a Sherlock Holmes story. So let's look through this together. And I think it's a good example of deduction, just as the mechanics logic selection provided us a practical example to better understand the strategy of inductive and deductive logic. This provides a good example to explain deductive reasoning. And the notion of syllogisms and how they have to have truth, validity, and soundness. We'll get to that in a minute. So it begins, right? I wonder what the fellow is looking for. And Sherlock Holmes says, as they come across the fellow, he says, "You mean the sergeant of Marines?" Brag and bounce, thought I to myself. He knows that I cannot verify his guess. And so the guy's wondering, how did he know that man was a sergeant of Marines? Again, what does he say? For Mr. Sherlock Holmes, he said, stepping into the room and handing my friend the letter. The person, right? He says, here was an opportunity of taking the conceit out of him. Now, conceit, the idea of hubris. So the narrator is thinking Sherlock Holmes is being arrogant, thinking that he knows that the man is a retired sergeant of Marines. But perhaps it is the narrator who is a little bit arrogant, thinking that he will have the opportunity to take the conceit out of him. He little thought of this when he made that random shot. May I ask, my lad, I said in the blandest voice, what your trade may be? Commissary, sir, he said, uniform away for repairs. And you where, I asked? A sergeant, sir, Royal Marine Light Infantry. Right? He clicked his heels together and raised his hand and salute and was gone. So now the narrator's saying, I confess I was considerably startled by this fresh proof, right? And so he says to Sherlock, how in the world did you deduce that? Deduce what? Why, that he was a retired sergeant of Marines. I have no time for trifles, he answered brusquely. Then with a smile, excuse my rudeness, you broke the thread of my thoughts, but perhaps it as well. So you actually were not able to see that that man was a sergeant of Marines? No. It's easier to know it than to explain why I knew it, right? And he says, first, what? I could see a great blue anchor tattooed on the back of the fellow's hand. That smacked of the sea. He had a military carriage, second. Regulation side whiskers. There we have the Marine, 3. He was a man with some amount of self-importance and a certain air of command. You must observe the way in which he held his head and swung his cane. A steady, respectable, middle-aged man, too, on the face of him. All facts which led me to believe that he had been a sergeant. Wonderful. And what does he say? Commonplace. Though I thought from his expression that he was pleased at my evident surprise and imagination. So when we're talking about syllogisms and Aristotelian logic, right? The simple Google definition, an instance of form of reasoning in which a conclusion is drawn from two given or assumed propositions, each of which shares a term with the conclusion and shares a common or middle term, not present, right? It's a form of deductive reasoning as distinct from inductive. So it's important to recognize the difference. Just as Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance provided us with both examples, let me share with you. I'll put the link to this page as well. It's a major premise, just like our book, but again, it's always nice to have extra examples. Minor premise, conclusion. Okay, so that's what a syllogism is. It's a specific 3-part deductive argument with major, minor, and then a conclusion. A very simple example, right? Some people are allergic to lactose, the product in dairy. If you know that you are allergic to all lactose, major premise. Minor premise, cheese has lactose in it. Conclusion, you know you're going to get sick from cheese, right? The thing about syllogisms is a lot of times people recognize them and they recognize the validity of them, but they choose to ignore the facts. Sometimes syllogisms can be persuasive if they are, but not logical, right? And that's what, if they're persuasive but not logical, but that doesn't make them sound, okay? So My point is, let's lead into the notion of truth, validity, and soundness. The three things that have to be true for a syllogism to be a successful deductive argument. Number one, right? The statements have to be true, right? Number two, the structure has to be valid. There has to be a major and a minor, and the conclusion comes because the major premise, right, makes the minor one inescapable. So, and that's what makes them sound. So truth is that the sentences are logical and true. Validity is that the structure is logical, and soundness is when you have truth and validity. So if someone says that's a sound argument, it means the premises are true and the structure is valid. Perfect example, Lady Macbeth. What does she tell Macbeth to persuade him? She says, if you love me, right, then you'll say things that are true and I can trust you. And you said, right, you were going to kill Duncan. So if you don't kill Duncan now, how can I trust you when you say you love me? Again, the whole idea, he never said he was going to kill Duncan, but her structure is valid. You said you were going to kill Duncan, right? People that say things, if they love the person, if they're being honest, they should follow through with it. Therefore, you don't love me if you don't follow through. It's a persuasive argument to him because the structure is valid. But the fact is, he never said he was going to kill Duncan, right? When she says, if you're a man, then you'll kill Duncan. If you love me, then you'll kill Duncan, right? And he says, well, I am a man. Okay. So, but that's not a valid, right? A validly sound argument. So a lot of fallacies might be valid in their structure, but their premises are not true. And that's why a lot of times it can be very misleading when something's structure is valid, but there's no truth in the premises, or they leave out the truth. So again, a lot of fallacies operate in this manner too, but the statements need to be true, the structure needs to be valid, major, minor, conclusion, and then we have soundness. So hopefully everybody is feeling more confident about truth, validity, and soundness, and this video better helps you understand these logic strategies such as induction and deduction and recognizing truth, recognizing validity. Therefore, one can conclude that an argument is sound. As always, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.